Bullshit. Bullshit. Derivative. That I love. I absolutely love.
Hello beautiful people, how are you doing? Tanks. I love tanks. Main battle tanks, heavy tanks, light tanks, water tanks. Wheel tracked, assault, transport, self-propelled guns. Tanks are cool. They are big, heavy, noisy, just like me. Today's topic is not going to focus on event or conflicts. Today's topic is going to be about a vehicle and the role it played, or better, did not play in a conflict. The FIAT-2000. Why was it built? How was it built? And how its construction influenced armored vehicles in Italy until World War II? Let's learn it together. In early 1916, at Fles-Courcelette, the British revealed a new type of weapon, a vehicle that could cross the trenches and the uneven terrain of the war-torn front line. The tank. The British Mark I, despite its problem, had managed to surprise the high command of many nations, leading to boost or start new mechanized programs between the nations involved in the conflict. But the truth is that the armored vehicles were not a novelty. In truth, armored vehicles were already used in the conflict, and prior to it, armored cars. And Italy had already experience with them. By the time of the Italo-Turkish War of 1912, Italy deployed various armored cars in Libya in order to defend convoys, and the army seemed to be pleasurably surprised. The models ready by then were the Auto-Mitragliatrice machine gun car Isotta-Fraschini (RM) and the FIAT-Arsenale Amico, standing for Auto-Mitragliatrice Corazzata, meaning armored machine gun car. Out of the two, the Amico, acronym that sounds like the word for friend in Italian, was the most successful and well known. Developed in 1912, the armored car was developed in the Arsenale d'Artiglieria del Regio esercito Torino, under the direction of Colonel Crispino Bonagente. The name Fiat derived from the use of the chassis of the truck Type 15, tipo Libya type, armored up with 6 mm of armor, and armed with a Maxim Mod 1906 6.5 mm mounted on a rotating turret with 360 degrees rotation and a crew of a driver and 2 gunners. The car was very successful, protecting logistic moving detachments. The Isotta-Fraschini RM remained a prototype, despite being used through the First World War, and keeping its status of prototype even when provided to the army in 1913. However, in 1917, the armored car saw combat on the zones of battle when it was captured by Austrian forces. Private companies started to develop their own armored cars in order to donate them to the Italian military in the hope to attract enough attention.
I'm just excited to see my Lord and Savior represented in such glorious
armored cars.
I do hope his eyes gaze upon me.
And a contract with the army can be signed.
I don't know. Notice me, senpai! Notice me!
In 1915, Italy then developed a new armored car, which was produced in mass and adopted, the Lancia 1Z, using the chassis of a Lancia Type 61 light truck, in the same spirit of the previous model, but adding the ability to add 1 or 2 coaxial turrets, allowing to mount up to 3 machine guns. Initially, 3 Dice German machine guns, then changed to Maxim Vickers 6.5 mm but also allowing for other guns. For example, a variation using the top turret in an anti-aircraft role, mounting a Chasseur mod 1914-16 8mm with 600 to 1,200 rounds per weapon. By 1917, a new version of the vehicle was produced, known as the Lancia 1ZM, and in 1939 a command variant was produced in Italian Eastern Africa for the campaign in Ethiopia. It is estimated that 137 were built, and I really wish DICE added them to Battlefield 1. It was not only the armored cars, which Italy developed earlier. It was also the self-propelled artillery, mostly thanks to the same trucks used for armored cars. Through the 1915 and 1918, Italy proceeded to mechanize many pieces of artillery, mounting anti-air autocannons as well as heavy artillery cannons 1 to 35 and 1 and 5 mm, mounting such weapons on the flatbed of the truck, allowing the weapon to be shot on board and reducing the deployment times, as well as increasing movement. 18 batteries of artillery were created, being used in various engagements between 1916 and 1918. But what about tanks? With this much experience with armored vehicles and self-propelled guns, what was Italy's experience with tanks? By the beginning of the conflict, the mountainous terrain of the front made it hard for the vehicles to be deployed. By 1917, following the defeat at Caporetto, the front line had moved in the plain terrain of Veneto, where the only obstacle for vehicles appeared to be the many rivers. Despite the terrain and preference for armored cars, Italian officers had interest in the British and French tanks since 1916. From the Rivista di Artiglieria Genio, the magazine of artillery intelligence of 1916-1917, forgive me if the wording is a bit weird, but I admit that translating these documents written in a very technical and slightly, mostly due to the terminology, archaic Italian is tougher than what I expected. The editorial board followed assiduously the development of this new weapon since its appearance, giving all the news that were allowed to be made public knowledge. It is known that on the 15th of September 1916, in the attack pronounced by the English on the Somme, from the Leuze Wood, west of Comblé up to Pozières, a front of 10 kilometers, big armored and unarmed British cars appeared, obtaining great success with surprise operation on tactical field. In the moment of bombardment, for the preparation of the attack, the Germans had the not great surprise to see advance, slowly but with determination, proceeding infantry lines, the gigantic iron monsters, slowly slithering without impediment on the broken terrain and devastated by trenches, explosion holes produced by mines and projectiles, opening fire on the front and from the sides, reaching and going over barbed wire and German trenches. For a few weeks, the everyday press took over the news and of the description of the new instrument of war, more or less making them up.
Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
As fantastic illustration did, like how we imagine the tanks, etc. Before in the Scientific American, and then taking away the chances of publication in some magazines of warring countries like Illustration and The Nature, etc., authentic illustration appeared on the new instrument of war, accompanied by new descriptive hints, based on which it's possible to confront and integrate the sparse data here and there, providing a nearly precise description of the land ironclads, much like some hyperbolically called this armored car. The interest was also expressed when an Italian observer was sent to the Western Front to evaluate the tanks in 1917. The spring of the same year, Italy buys one FT-17 for evaluation. Conclusions coming from the light tank provide many positive reviews of the vehicle, believing it to be a possible good investment to further support the Italian armored cars thanks to their maneuverability and speed. It is believed that in the current situation it will be found very efficient application in counter-offensive actions, general or partial, a certain number of tanks, preferably if of the light kind. Such is presented by the case that this command believes that asking Allied armies the urgent delivery of a few units, complete and ready to be used. Thus, Italy ordered a large quantity of the tank. But the French government cancelled the sale in fear that Renault would not be able to keep up production for their armated heir. Later, only a handful of models were authorized for sale to Italy. Italy also made orders to the United Kingdom but received a negative answer for the same reason. The British military mission to Italy explained so on the last request of British tanks in August 1918. The British Army does not possess tanks of 18 tons type sufficient to equip British battalions of tanks in France. It is thus expressed with great regret to not have available tanks on this type. The new type of tanks will be ready by November, but it is believed that it will be hard to take place of this type of machine, if not for long after the date above indicated. Following the defeat at Caporetto, Italy found itself even more in need of tanks, pressing on France to sell them some. Armando Diaz himself, new head of the Italian armed forces, following the defeat went to Paris to ask tanks and gas grenades. This lack of weapon kept postponing the counteroffensive. One of the causes that prevented us from gaining success by all means to us capable was the absolute lack of tanks. If we had these machines in the area of the Piave, we would have certainly thrown back into the water the assaulters. On the other hand, there is a danger that the enemy might come here armed with tanks and send them against us, especially if they come to establish bridges. In that case, there is the fear, the impression that they could make on the troops facing them, a machine of war that they do not know. For all this reason, offensive as much as defensive, it is extremely desirable that the French and Allied French government, as much as it can send, of the expedition of 32 tanks that already at the 1st of June Minister Locher gently offered to Mr. Nava, Under Secretary for Weapons and Ammo. By March to April 1918, the Italian High Command believes that Germany would send tanks to Italy by November, and thus the pressure for tanks grew and even further. Thus, Italy obtained in 1918 a license to produce FT-17, and the army requested an order of 1,400 tanks by spring 1919. To prepare armored units in August 1918, Italian officers are sent in France in the School of Assault Artillery in order to form the future tankers, and in Verona the Reparto di Marcia Department of March is formed by the 26th of October 1918. Italy created the first special department of March assault tanks. The Italian armored fleet was composed of 8 tanks, one Schneider CA-1, firing old F-17, one of which modified to wield an Ansaldo Mod 105-14 cannon, making it a self-propelled artillery gun, and 2 FIAT-2000 prototypes. However, on the 11th of November 1918, the war ended, and the meager Italian tank fleet never had to face the German tanks. While the Italian High Command often praised the light tanks, they convinced themselves that the production of heavier vehicles had been a mistake and a waste of resources, as stated by Diaz in July 1918. However, I do not believe that these tanks, British ones, might be of use to us. Heavy tanks are no use to us. If they are of use for learning, that can be done with English instructors, so much so that Major Benicelli knows the material. Now that we know how hard was it for Italy to obtain even such small numbers of tanks, it is time to explore what was the Italian plan for a tank, understanding how vital for the nation was the necessity to produce a tank without relying on others. The project of a heavier tracked armored car was not actually a result of First Corsalet in 1916. Italy had started work on what will be the FIAT-2000 already in 1915. A decree of the 13th of October 1915 stipulated a contract between the Italian military and Fiat. Between the Italian military administration, represented by Major General Cavalry official Giulio Martini, as ministerial decree of the 13th of October 1915, and the Society Fabbrica Italiana Automobili Torino, Fiat, Italian Car Factory Turin, represented by its director, General Engineer Guido Fornaca, it is stipulated what follows. Article 1. The military administration buys from the Fabbrica Italiane Automobili Torino an assault armored car type 2000 that the already noted factory has to build based on its own studies and drawings. The deals also stipulated the characteristic of the vehicle. The armored assault car, as for previous article, will match the general lines the drawing attach C1A-34456 and C1C-34804, and will have these characteristics. Total length of about meter 7.40 or 24.28 feet, max width of about meter 3.30 or 10.82 feet, wheelbase for advanced skates meters 2.48 or 8.14 feet, max height of about 3.88 meters or about 20.73 feet, total weight in order of march or of about kilograms 14,000 or 88,184.90 pounds, minimal rate of turning meters 3 or 9.84 feet. The document also details components such as the engine, the friction, the gearbox, the radiator, the oil tanks, electrical engines, the oil consumptions, the ability to vault over which inclination, trenches, the weaponry, the armor, and even the cost of about 375,000 lire, which, thanks to inflation.com, it should be of around 1,384,625.16 euros today, or, for my American viewers, of about 1,520 and 138.42 US dollars. But let's start from the beginning.
In the beginning.
The objective of the Italian army was to avoid remaining behind technologically, as it had happened with Italy for water-guided airplanes, which, despite being one of the first nations to use planes in a military role, had been overwhelmed by the adversaries and allies alike, for which Italy had to rely on France a lot. Fiat was not the only company which took the job. Many private investors and companies, much like for previous armored cars, had proposed their own design by 1917, like the Assalto Testuggine Corazzata, Armored Testudo, and the Assalto Fortino Mobile, Mobile Fort.
Notice me, senpai! Notice me!
But only the FIAT-2000 was the one with which construction had actually reached prototype phase. The FIAT-2000 employed the A12 FIAT engine, aviation type. The engine had 6 vertical cylinders, placed in lines of 3. The iron cylinder also were covered in sheets of metal for water circulation and cooling. Each cylinder had 4 valves, 2 for aspiration and 2 for exhaust. The engine reached 250 horsepower and weighed 319 kilograms or about 509.80 pounds. The oil tank of the tank had a max capacity of around 600 liters. The exhaust of the engine was expelled from 2 collectors on the right side of the vehicle. The tank also possessed 2 electrical engines generating electricity through dynamos on the right side of the vehicle. The entirety of the engine, drive and gear were placed in a lower compartment, sealed and separated from the crew compartment, avoiding intoxication of the crew and allowing the design to be modular. The driver was placed in an armored cockpit, with a periscope and an hatchet that could be opened for a better view. The first prototype had an entrance hatchet on the right, and the second one on the left. The first prototype had originally a wooden truncated turret, then changed with a more iconic dome, mounting cannon, Cannone da Montagna 65-17. The tank had 6 water-cooled machine guns, Fiat Revelli Mod 1914, mounted on the hull, each with 120 degrees rotation, a max inclination of 22 degrees and a max depression of -17. The tank had an all-round 20 mm thick armor. Since 1916, the tank was put under test of traversing harsh and steep terrain. Compared to FT-17, a Schneider CA1 and was finally presented to the Third Army General Emanuele Filiberto, Duke of Aosta, near Casier on April 1918, while in August it was presented in Piacenza publicly for ulterior tests. The tank did not give a good impression on the officers of the Italian army. Yes, it was great at traversing various obstacles, managing to climb surfaces of 17% inclination, trenches up to 3 meters wide, and climb steps as tall as a meter. However, the tank was the heaviest ever built at the time, and it showed. It was far too heavy to make it friendly for air transportation. Its top speed of 7 km per hour left a lot to be desired, fearing that the size would end up leading the survivability of the vehicle to be extremely low on the battlefield. The surface pressure of the tank was far too high, which made it good to flatten fields of barbed wire, but not to traverse muddy and broken terrain. The crew compartment, while free of toxic exhaust gas, was far from comfortable. 4 gunners could count on a height of 1.60 meters while standing up, while the 3 on the back had a space only 1 meter tall, requiring them to kneel. The 20mm of armor, while good against small arms, was already far too little for fast-firing cannons and the new anti-tank weaponry that was being developed. The war ended before the Fiat German armored offensive. This does not mean that the FIAT-2000 never saw some combat, or that its life was over. While one of the 2 prototypes became a monument, the other was transferred in Libya alongside 3 FT-17, and in 1922 fought off rebels. Its speed and limited autonomy, 75 km, proved problematic, despite the psychological effect it had on the enemy. The tank department was detached at the Mishasta stop, nearby Zanzur, and the occasion of letting the tank FIAT-2000 advance against a group of about 100 rebels that remained terrorized and were dispersed at the first machine gun shots. All in all, it responded well, but the tank revealed to be a great inconvenience due to the great mobility of the enemy, the problem of the slow pace. Thus the tank was mostly used on parades, as a mean of propaganda in Tripoli, much like the broader tank in Italy, which in 1927 was mostly relegated to public manifestations. In 1934, an attempt to modernize the vehicle, probably for more propagandistic motives under the fascist government, was started. The FIAT-2000 Mod 34, as it was also referred, former prototype number 2, had most of its weaponry kept, as well as the engine. However, the 2 frontal machine guns were swapped for 2 37mm L40 anti-tank guns. Sadly, in 1939 the tank had one last public appearance. By 1943 it was spotted in a foundry, probably cannibalized for the war effort. However, in 2017, 100 years following the creation of the vehicle, a group of private citizens, with the collaboration of the Museo delle Forze Armate, Museum of Armed Forces, built a 1-to-1 replica of the tank, which can now be seen by visiting said museum. The FIAT-2000 was deemed a failure, but it was still a great technological achievement, making Italy the 4th nation in the world to project, manufacture and field an homemade tank. The vehicle suffered from the limited technological and industrial abilities of Italy, but nonetheless met the criteria that the original order required. Unfortunately, the Italian High Command saw the failure of the program and deemed the heavier tanks were a waste of resources for Italy. Despite never seeing combat on the front in 1918, light tanks were prioritized until 1940 with the P-2640. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that it was both interesting and educational. If you want to add to my conclusions, then feel free to do so in the comment. Before leaving, as always, you can find all the sources in the description, and here is the list of books and magazines that aided me in researching the topic. Giulio Benussi, armati, autoblinde del Regio, esercito italiano 1918-1943, Nico Scarlato, autoblindo italiano 1910-1945, and last but not least, Autori Vari, il carro armato FIAT-2000, dal 1917 alla costruzione della Replica. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.